Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you doing now? What are we, 10 weeks into quarantine? I'm losing my mind, but I'll tell you what's keeping me sane. Talking to cool people on the show, and today is no exception. This is Ben Passmore. If you don't know who Ben is, let me read you his bio right now. Originally from Massachusetts, cartoonist Ben Passmore has been writing and illustrating comics since he was a child. He's created comics like Day Glowy Hole, the Eisner Award-nominated and Ignatz Award-winning comic collection Your Black Friend, and Bottom Feeders with Ezra Clayton Daniels, which was published by Fantagraphics last year. In addition, he is a regular contributor to the daily satirical publication The Nib. That's where I first read Ben, and became a very big fan of his comics. And now that I'm doing these episodes remotely, he lives in Philadelphia, I thought, why not write him and talk? And what a great talk it was. I mean, we ended up doing a lot, spent the first, I would say, half talking kind of current politics because that was on both of our minds, and that's what's going on right now. And if you are talking to a political cartoonist or someone whose comics work is infused with politics, that's what's going to happen. And also, Ben's just a smart, funny dude, so it was a pleasure just to talk about what's going on in the world in a intelligent and funny way. I listened back to this last night. I feel like I was somewhat needy in this interview, where it may not be apparent, but I feel like I was just like, please, Ben, tell me I'm smart. But maybe that was just the fact that I was exhausted when we conducted this interview. This is from maybe like a week or two ago. I'm trying to put out these episodes, the ones that are more timely or more about current events. I'm trying to put those out faster than the ones that are evergreen. So they're a little bit out of order. No one cares, do you? By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. If you'd like to check out other episodes, they're all on Spotify. They're all downloadable at beginnings.libsyn.com. I've talked to hundreds of people from all walks of life. Musicians, philosophers, artists, comedians, performers, TV writers. If you're here because you enjoy Ben's comic work, maybe check out some of the episodes I did with other comics people. Matt Lubchansky, who is I think, associate editor and also a cartoonist at The Nib. Sina Grace, Magdalene Passaggio, Chris Claremont, who longtime X-Men writer. Rob Guillory, love his book Farmhand. Cecil Castellucci, and many others. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, what else? Google Play, or whatever the Google thing is now. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Andy Beckerman. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you are all staying healthy, safe, and sane. Things are about to get crazier, I think, as unemployment ends, as the extra unemployment bonuses end, and rent's going to come due in August. So I don't know. Go out and do whatever work you can do to help out. Protest, raise money, join an organization like DSA. All right, that's enough of that. Now, let's talk to Ben. I'll put this out there.
No, it's all good.
I'm very tired. I have not slept well in weeks. I don't know if you're in the same boat. My wife and I both wake up multiple times during the night.
Do you guys got kids?
Nope.
Okay.
Pets.
It's just anxiety?
Yeah. I think anxiety. I think, I would say, maybe politically we're not living in the most Great times. Yep, that's the adjective my brain could think of. Great.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's real. I mean, I guess it's real. And I guess for me, other than like the global pandemic, a lot of things sort of feel bad, maybe in a louder way, but the same, if that makes sense. Like, particularly I lived in the South for 15 years, which I don't think the South is inherently any like freer or more restrictive than other parts of the U.S., you know? In a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of the same. Like, I was talking to someone the other day about the when he was first elected. I went out with some friends or actually with a former partner to get dinner at a strip mall in like Algiers, Paris. And there was just like a truck filled with like kind of militia dudes, like same outfits. They didn't have any ARs or anything, but some of them had like handguns, and they were just sort of hanging out in the truck. There was maybe like 10 of them, and they were just sort of mean mugging people. And it's a part of it's Algiers. It's like it's a mostly black area, right? And these were all white guys, and that there's not. So they clearly come from somewhere specifically for this purpose. And I was like, all right, I mean, this is like a bit of what I was, I guess what I have to expect is going to happen now in the next 4 years. And sort of like down the street at Marconi Plaza, I don't know who Marconi is, other than apparently he was a fascist collaborator with Mussolini. But anyway, there's a Columbus statue.
Wait, the radio dude?
Marconi?
Yeah. Or are there two Marconis? The only Marconi I can think of is the guy who invented the radio.
Maybe.
Is he also a fascist?
Apparently, yeah, he was into Mussolini. He was like, they were tight. Apparently. I'm all learning this. I never thought of that statue specifically or that park, other than once in a while I would run in it. But it is more in like the super, like South Philly Italian neighborhood, which I do not go into, right? That's like I left Louisiana, I don't need to go back. You know what I mean? So I stay out of that neighborhood. But currently there's hundreds of people from that neighborhood, but also Proud Boys from like rural PA that all have guns and bats, and they're just hanging around in that park waiting to beat people up because they think someone's going to knock that statue over. So I was like, well, this is interesting because things are sort of the same as they were a few years ago, but now there's just way more of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I like the way that you said it. It's louder. It's not like America's changed. I get so angry. I should really have a little more empathy, but I get angry at a lot of my like white liberal friends for not being where I am. And I'm like, why haven't you, and I'm like, well, I started reading like Chomsky and Zinn like 20 years ago.
Right.
Maybe I should have a little bit of empathy and be like, hey, instead of reading White Fragility, maybe you read People's History, or maybe you read, something, maybe I should be a little more, but I'm like, yeah, no, it's felt the same as it's felt since since I started to understand what kind of country we were living in,
right?
Yeah, a couple decades ago. But it's more like people are screaming it now as opposed to people kind of like whispering it before.
Yeah, and I mean even things like people's responses to even the situation with COVID. You know what I mean? Like people being like, wow, things are really bad, and sort of describing in the particular ways that they're really bad. And it feels a little bit like having a younger sibling who's like several grades behind you coming home and be like, did you know the earth is 70% water? It's like, yeah, I've been knowing.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's also insane to me. I was just watching The Normal Heart, which is do you know that Larry Kramer? It's the movie version of Larry Kramer, the AIDS activists, his play.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't seen it.
It's about the early days of the AIDS epidemic, and I'm just like, oh, it is just so eerily. It was made. I mean, the play was written a long time ago, but the movie was made in 2014, I think. Mm-hmm. It's just eerily similar to exactly how this happened, how the pandemic response happened.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, anyone who was who was alive and conscious like 30 years ago is just like, yeah, obviously this is what's happening. Of course the government's not going to do shit about this, until enough of the people that they I was going to say care about, but I find sociopaths don't care about much. But until something that they care about is endangered, they don't do anything.
Right. I mean, it seems sort of more likely to me that, like, because clearly from day one, the interest hasn't been about, like, what is it, curing COVID or something. It's like, it's just sort of fast tracking the narrative of, like, a solution. So it seems more likely that, like, that we'll get to a point even more where, like, the historically marginalized people who are already dying of, like, drug addiction, yada yada yada. We had the pandemic of what is it, like, fentanyl was killing off tons of people before, right? I feel like what's probably more likely is we'll get to a point where our society is structured around even being more exclusionary, but now under the guise of people not getting sick. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah. So wait, so like, how old were you when you started to understand this stuff?
Well, I mean, probably having sort of like a holistic critique, like a sense of like a sense of history and like how sort of dynamics worked. Like probably was in high school. Like I think I started being specifically an anarchist in high school. I don't think that I necessarily thought about like a whole politic prior to that. I mean, in terms of like, I've been black my whole life, and that brings with it, and like not only black but mixed, and also living in a very white town with like a very very insular black community within that I sort of was like in and out of, you know what I mean? So like the way the race worked, so I had a broader sense of like how people treated black people, how these two things were different. I was like criminalized very young. Like I think I was hauled into court at like 14 or something for the first time. So like it's like I think I was forced to sort of have a wider view of like at least the social environment of my town, and then I was sent to a reform school when I was 16. And in the reform school, actually, I had like, I don't even know how he would identify himself now, but he was my history teacher. He was like a young guy, you know what I mean, like beard, like didn't go to the barber, but he taught with Howard Zinn's People's History. So that sort of coupled with we had like a little like uprising in my school. Those two things together sort of like cemented like a bigger politic.
Wait, what do you mean uprising?
It wasn't
was at the
like
reform school.
Yeah, it was at the reform school. It was like, it wasn't like a military school. It was like, I don't know. It was a really weird environment. It's like you ever watch the movie The Master?
Yes.
With Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's more like that. Like it was like a weird talk therapy school that was like very hierarchical, and it was like really based on snitching. So anyway, one day we were like, we don't really like snitching on anybody. We're very tired of being repressed. So we just like wild out, and we took over our dorm, and there was like one kid was like building a barricade and stuff, and we made like we went full like I was about to say Red October. That's unrelated. We went full like just sort of like Russian Revolution with it. We were making art on the walls. We were coming up with slogans. We created like a whole sort of ethos that we'd be living our lives by. We ended up being sort of like little petite communists. And the school wasn't super into it, but it was the first time. Unsurprisingly, you know what I mean? The really repressive school was not into us, our linear social model, But yeah, that was the first time I was like, oh, this is, I have an understanding of like, an environment is repressing me, and I can like sort of get with some people and try to live a new way. It's also very impressive because I never read anything. You know what I mean? Like some of the other kids, I think were better in school. But the reform school did not exist to educate us at all. You know what I mean? It's one of those classic things. And a lot of us were impoverished kids who weren't very good in school, myself included. So the fact that I even knew what communism was amazing to me.
So yeah, I mean, the school was just there to discipline you into shove you into some mold.
Yeah, like most school, it's trying to make you into a citizen in the worst sense of the word.
Yeah. I think I was off of my own little world when I was younger. I mean, still, but like even more so when I was younger. So there were so many of those lessons that kind of just went over my head, and I just missed because I was like just playing in my own imagination. That my schooling did not do the thing it was supposed to do, which was teach me to be a competent neoliberal citizen. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably a good thing, right? It's probably a good thing.
I mean, seeing how some of my classmates turned out. I mean, they don't live bad lives, but it's more like that's not the life I ever wanted.
It makes you wonder. It does make me wonder, and especially with people sort of coming to sort of like these quote unquote understandings of policing, like now, which is crazy to me. Especially just given like whatever, you know what I mean? Like we had, during the Obama administration, that's when Black Lives Matter came up. Like depending on if you're around my age, like you've had plenty of, like I grew up. In a pretty young age, heard about Amadou Diallo? Yeah, in New York City. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, I could just be at my house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, to me, it's like you've had, even if it's not personalized, you've had, like, a really, really long time to sort of, like, identify this as a problem. Never mind sort of be fed up with it. And it makes me wonder people who have not felt very alienated by society in general, like whether or not they would notice if, how bad things are. I mean, I think I'm saying that it clearly takes a lot for them to notice, you know what I mean?
It takes a lot for them to notice, and then even more for them to actually do something besides like, tweet out hashtag Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, for sure. And then sort of deciding the change, like what feels like an adequate decision. It's like one of those hard things in a really stratified nation where it's like, it's like the idea that body cams were a solution for a long time is nuts. Like in New Orleans, the solution is just, we don't call the police. You know what I mean? Like basically no matter how bad it gets, you cannot call the police. And it's interesting, people like, this is the first time I've heard like people in the news, like outside of your Democracy Nows or your It's Going Down podcast, that people are like, what does a world with no cops look like? And in some ways I'm like, I mean, effectively, or you could talk to people currently who effectively live in a world that tries to exclude police as much as possible.
Yeah.
So it's this idea that it seems like this sci-fi universe also sort of indicates a certain kind of disconnection.
It's insane to me that, people are just like, I would see on Twitter in the last like week or two, people just like, but what are you supposed to call when there's like a sexual assault or something? And then like 30 of my female friends are just like, they don't do anything anyway. What do you,
right.
I went to the cops and they said, what do you want me to do about it? And then
right.
set me on my way. So I'm just like,
right.
In my entire, it's weird. I grew up in the suburbs. I'm Jewish though. And so I'm othered just a very Christian area. So I'm othered just by dint of that. But I grew up listening to punk, listening to like old 80s hardcore and seeing how just in my pretty white area, just how the cops treated like the skaters. And I'm just like, I don't understand how anyone older than a teenager at this point doesn't think the cops are bad.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I think a lot of people have this narrative, and it is interesting thinking about the suburbs where it's like I know a bunch of white kids, like, for instance, Matt Boris was telling me he grew up as a skater, and that introduced him to like a displeasing disposition when it came to the police.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it does fall in line with this like idea that like you have bad experiences with the police because on some level you're doing something wrong. It's like, if you know what I mean. So I think it's interesting. I feel like a high percentage of the white friends in my life do not like the police, and they started off as like graffiti and skateboarders. So in some ways it's like y'all went out of your way to have a bad experience with the police. But it is also interesting. It's like in these really white communities where it's like, in some ways, certain things, like more marginalized positions are somehow like reaffirmed when they're all white, and they're like, well, I'm a skater, or I'm a graffiti kid, or I like to wear UFOs and socks on my arms, and people are like, it's a lifestyle choice, you can stop, which is also false. You're just trying to have fun.
Well, my introduction to, I wasn't even a skater. My friends were, but I noticed early on their function was to discipline people into doing the things they want. If you wanted to, like, here's my like very like thin version of what of how awful the police are, which is like my friends and I would play this game called Let It Bounce, which is basically volleyball on a tennis court, and we were allowed to, right? We were perfectly within our rights to do this. You could go to the high school and play this game on the tennis courts if you wanted to. If it was in the evening, you could put a quarter into the lights, and that would turn the lights on. And we would be hassled by the cops for doing this thing. But yet I would see people get drunk or get high or do something worse in their basements at home, and they never got hassled by anyone.
Right.
And that, to me, I'm just like, oh, I get it. They're here. The cops are here just to discipline people into being compliant, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. They're like, especially for skaters, right? They don't want you to grind on things.
Right.
It's like who cares? Right.
Right.
It's not,
oh yeah. So
deal.
There's like a little black wax on the corners of stuff. That's it. But that to them is like is as bad as, like, I don't know, setting off a dirty bomb.
Yeah, which is it's like it's a similar thing, like right, like it's a level. Yeah, it's the same as shooting up a school, grinding. Don't ollie here. Yeah, it's just not it's something that, like, even if it is sort of like a thing that communities are annoyed with, it doesn't require a man with a gun to solve it for you, which I think is the other thing. Especially just like seeing in the news and in my own life just how fast it escalates, because also it's not just a man with a gun, it's like usually a very insecure man
Yeah, think of
With
all
a lot
the
of
people.
compensation. Yeah.
Think of all the people from your high school that became cops. Think
Right.
about who they were in high school and how that probably has not changed that much.
That's right. Yeah. We're supplementing people, some people's sort of career of being bullies. Yeah, this idea that these are public servants has just always seemed crazy to me. It's like, yeah, and people are always like you were saying. People are like, "What about all the murders and sexual assaults?" It's like, what world do you live in that you've walked that you have this idea that the police are doing anything about murders and sexual assaults? That's crazy to me when I see it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the part of this whole kind of fantasy that our entire country lives within. I don't think
Right.
it's like it's just about policing. I think I was thinking about this earlier this week, but I'm like, oh, I was listening to a podcast that interviewed a guy who wrote a book about Jakarta, about like how the U.S. backed the genocide in Indonesia in 1965, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wait till these people that are suddenly like waking up to like the oppression that's going on within their country learn the mass slaughter that's been going on outside of our borders for, I mean, let's say conservatively since the CIA started, but obviously since the beginning.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the fantasy everyone lives in just to like ignore this stuff. The delusion is so thick here. And I wonder if that's if that is particularly American or if that is just 21st century humans. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, our brand of like of colonialism, is not exclusive to us. It is interesting thinking about like this idea, this like mantra for like Trump people, Trump himself. Like even like my mother's a Trump person.
What?
It's this yeah. Not to bury the lead, but yeah. So, but this idea that like we live in the greatest country in the world, what I mean, we're a gift to society. It does feel like it feels like someone, I don't know, like a deadbeat dad that just got into AA. He's like, no, I'm sober. Like things are good. Look, I got a car now. It's like, yeah, but like. Can we talk about how you ruined my childhood? No, I'm sober today. Like, it's like it feels, and it does feel patriarchal in this specific kind of way where there seems like a really pointed lack of interest in sort of reflecting on like the, even among liberals around like the violence inherent to like propping up the world we live in. Like I remember, this is before Trump really seemed like a threat. People were reflecting on the Obama administration, and I think it was for the Comics Journal, me, Ron Wimberly, Tana Tucker, and Ezra Daniels, who wrote Bottom Feeders with me. We were doing and I think Keith Knight was involved. There was a whole bunch of people. And we were reflecting on the Obama administration, and I remember, I think maybe it was Ron Wimberly brought up the fact that kids in Afghanistan won't go outside on a clear day because the drones are out there and they're the most likely to bomb people. And I'm like we made like the Obama administration, but us as a society made Afghani children afraid of a clear blue sky. Mm-hmm. Like, how do we not stop everything? Like, we're the villains. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, when it was the other day, it was Obama's birthday, and all my, like, white liberal friends were, like, tweeting this stuff, and I was screaming at my phone, because I'm like, it was driving me insane. I'm like, the awful shit, Trump is awful. He's particularly disgusting. I'm not trying to diminish who the kind of like disgusting white supremacist he is and the kind of the shameless white supremacy that that being in that seat of power has unleashed on the country. Right. I'm not trying to minimize that. It was awful under Obama. Like Cornel West said, black faces in high places, right? We had that, and it was still awful, right? We tried that, it was still awful, and and my white liberal friends thought, well, just because there is a black man as a president, everything's fine. Instead, it's like, and I had to I yelled at my dad yesterday. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I was just like listing. I'm like, the concentration camps were built under the Obama administration. He advanced the drone war. He extended assassinations to American citizens, and I'm like just listing this stuff. And my dad's like, yes, but Trump. We're just screaming at each other. It's not. I try not to talk politics with my parents.
Yeah. Talking to, I feel like, my dad is sort of easy, but me and my dad, like, we were talking about the Minneapolis riots, and a conversation with my father, we assume sort of like the same things that are sort of important to me to coming to like a mutual understanding. Like, there was no discussion about the merits of a police station being burned to the ground. That was besides the point, just as a good thing in the world. You know what I mean? So after that, it was like, he was like, but why they burn down the Target? You know what I mean? It's like, but yeah, I mean, I think something that I think is maybe a conversation that will come maybe after Trump is gone, but probably not. But like, it's interesting to me that, that like the United States government can accommodate both Obama and Trump and still function, basically. And that feels meaningful to me. Like, I think we get caught up maybe in like the personality of these individual people. Yeah. But like, clearly, like, as unsurprisingly for me, I'm like, well, clearly the issue is government. Like the whole structure easily accommodates both these, because I believe that probably Barack Obama generally is a smart, self-reflective person.
100%.
You know what I mean? Like I would never collaborate on that level of genocide and imprisonment. I think you're an inherently evil person if you sign away on that. Whatever. But we've all done terrible things to people. I'm sure he loves power and attention. Yada 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 yada. But and Trump is obviously a fucking goblin. You know what I mean? But it's like, it bothers, it's just, in both cases, I was like, man, yeah, like the Republican Party just is riding for him, regardless. You know what I mean? Like we're living in like just a bizarre parody movie that, you know what I mean, right now, and they're still riding with him. And like the fact that like Mitt Romney once in a while will peek his head up as like a voice of reason on the right. Can you imagine? Like what?
Well, you're seeing, this is the thing. I think there's two basic things. One, because we repress reality as a nation, because we live in this delusion, and the delusion pushes down what's actually happening, and it's been for hundreds of years, right? It comes out in weird ways and weird behavior. And the other thing is, we're at this crisis point where you have the delusion and reality start crashing into each other. And when you have a crisis point on these edges where you have these paradigm shifts, you have really weird things happen. Like in any kind of complex system, whenever you're on these edges, it just creates weird behavior in people because they don't have any kind of North Star for how to behave or what to do. And as a society, we don't have that, right? It's all cracking up. And so people are just kind of like dodging left and right based on whatever shit is in front of them. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, it resonates. I was thinking about how, I don't remember who it was, but there was, this guy named Donald Glover that was killed by the police during Katrina. And I think it was maybe one of his relatives, but he was sort of saying that like in a crisis you like revert to who you really are. You know what I mean? So the police are murderers, you know. But I think that also that counts for everybody. You know what I mean? It's like there's like no easy comforts, I guess, except for like really really rich people. And I think we're all sort of reacting in the way that we're socialized in a lot of ways, for sure. Like yeah, like this army of goons by the Columbus statue it's no surprise to me. You know what I mean? They're just not at work. You know what I mean? Like they're probably out of work. Like they're doing like nothing they're doing is surprising to me at all.
It's not surprising, but I'm also just like, I can't imagine giving a shit about a statue so that I spend my spare time defending it from like, I mean, they have to, I mean, they really believe that everyone's coming for their statues. There isn't like one statue. I guess, I don't know. If there was a statue that was symbolically important to me, but I can't imagine like Columbus being that symbolically important to me.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, it's not even, I think even some of them, and I guess I know this for a fact because I was reading an interview of one of them. It's, you know, it's not not a statue of Columbus. It's a statue of whiteness. You know, like they're like they're very afraid to lose. Yeah, I mean, they're afraid to lose whiteness. You know what I mean? And this sort of like, yeah. And in that way, it's like that is sort of, to my understanding, like some of the attempt to unseat sort of like the narrative, like the racist narrative of the country, and like the way that whiteness is sort of like boosted up systematically. Like that is sort of what's at stake. Like, not to give them credit, but they're not wrong. Like people are coming for whiteness. You know what I mean? You know, not the color, obviously. You know, people are. But yeah, so in some ways, it's like it's a little heartening to see them freaked out and standing around a statue, because it's clear that like they're scared, right? Like they would still be at home yelling at their kids if there wasn't obviously, like, we are in a moment where like a heavy blow has been sort of like laid onto whiteness generally. Like it's not real, you know, like in a lot of ways it's like it's just a scratch, but like they not only removed the Frank Rizzo statue, you know, who's the incredibly racist former mayor and police chief. He's dead now, thank God, inshallah. And they also removed the mural of him. People have been legislating and trying to destroy both those things for years. Like people went to court just like trying to like write racist on it. It's been going on for years. And in one weekend, like people in the streets scared the government so much that they removed these statues and these meatballs down the street from me. You know what I mean? They're like, shit, what are they going to remove next?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as someone that like dips in and out of whiteness based on context, I get glimpses of what it's this really, you know, beyond this kind of like power, this fear of losing power. There's also this kind of like existential anxiety that comes out of this moment. And because whiteness there seems to be nothing inherent in whiteness, right? It is essentially an oppositional kind of identity.
Yeah.
So there's this existential identity, like, who are we? If we don't exist in opposition, what is whiteness? And I think that, you know, whether a lot of these meatballs, as you said, are conscious of that or not, I think there's something inherent in that of like, if we don't exist as the top of this hierarchy, you know, in opposition to, you know, in a way where we co-opt all other culture and bring it into our sphere, because we don't create real culture ourselves, or there isn't a ton of it in this like kind of just like absolute empty white room that is capital W whiteness.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder
Right.
if there's some of that at the bottom of this, like where it is like that statue is somehow symbolic of the only thing that is whiteness, which is like at the bottom just violence and co-optation.
Yeah. Well, I think something that's sort of interesting, because it's like, I think that some of them would say like, oh, like this is attack against whiteness, but I think probably actually like the larger sort of like banner that they're flying is normality.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess some of like, you know, white, like to be white is to be normal, right? And to be other thing, like to be a Latino is to be like spicy white. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, and in something that is sort of ironic, but also speaks to the political nature of looting. Something that ironic is that the United States itself is, you know, is a statue to white supremacy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I think in a lot of ways, like historically, since like these sort of quote unquote black riots have started, you know, they existed before the mid to late 60s, but that's like famously, you know, all the iconography of black people, quote unquote, lashing out. Like looting is sort of part of that, right? It creates like, we know what normal consumption is, and this introduces like abnormal consumption, you know. And I think in a broader way, like thinking about like something that like capitalism or like, what is it? Bell Hooks calls it like white supremacist capitalism. It's like this entitlement to normality. I think within society is also sort of like feeling a certain entitlement to a kind of abstracted whiteness, which like everyone participates in, right? Like there are tons of non-white police officers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're participating in white supremacy by, like we said, right? Like by policing space, you know, like public space, like what people are doing in public space, like so I think that's also something interesting too, and also speaks to the inherent insufficiency of someone like a black president, right? It's like he is going to perpetuate the same sort of like veneer of normality, which is ultimately whiteness, right? Like he's going to, like what we called code switching is putting on a veneer of whiteness, right?
Yeah.
That veneer of normality. So yeah, I feel very conflicted, because it's like in some ways some people will talk to me about, you know, the before mentioned meatballs and talk about how wrong they are. And I think that they're deeply immoral people, but but for in a lot of ways, like they are advocating for something that is historical, right? They're advocating for like a further perpetuation of violent normality.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, it's like I sort of think that white liberals I think that sort of ultimately are some people that haven't quite made the choice, right? Like we'll see, you know, like one of these Karens call the police on a black person. They'll be like, oh, but I voted for Bernie, da da da. You know, it's like okay, well you sort of oscillate between the different levels in which you'll perpetuate or participate in the sort of violent normality. Right. But it's like you have to choose. Like it has to either all go. Or it stays. Like there's no, yeah.
Right. Well, they'll ultimately fall on the side of the violence if you push them. Right. It's ultimately like, do you know Adam Curtis, the British documentarian?
No.
He's great. All his documentaries are essentially about. He's very in the Errol Morris vein of like I'm doing these kind of like creative kinds of documentaries. They're not just like straight-laced kind of like interviews. But they're all narratives about power in some way, and they're all narratives about how in the 20th into the 21st century, basically everyone's out of ideas. Everyone's exhausted and everyone's out of ideas for how to build a better future. So liberals have retreated into a fantasy land, whether that's a fantasy land of like online, like living online, whether it's a fantasy land of thinking like that there's a quick techno fix for the future, right? Or some way that we can just use computers to get out of what's coming, whatever. We've deluded ourselves into thinking that there's not going to be a crisis. Okay. And no one has any real ideas, and no one's putting forth a positive vision of the future. And for that to actually happen means that these kind of liberals have to give up power. They're going to have, like, there's no way about it because it's ill-gotten. It's fruit of a poison tree, right?
Right.
And when push comes to shove, they're not going to. They're not going to, no one's going to give up their Manhattan pied-à-terre in order for there to be some kind of social justice. They're just not going to. They're not going to, Bezos won't even give up, he won't give more than like a couple million to some kind of charity, let alone the chunk of his, he won't give up that, let alone, 60 billion or whatever to actually, that could actually like change things in some way. And if he does, it would be through a foundation that ends up just perpetuating the same kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways it's like liberalism is not a sufficient position to maintain the things that ultimately make themselves comfortable. Like, it's like fascism, like neoliberalism, like these things are much better, right, at sort of perpetuating sort of the law and order shit that will keep people in line so people can continue to eat brunch, So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait. So wait, your mom's a Trump supporter? Was she always pretty conservative, even when you were a kid?
Well, when I was a kid, she was my mom. Like I don't think that we didn't talk about Clinton or anything. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, for as long as me and my mom talked about it, which was probably when I was a teenager. She's always been really conservative. She's always been really, really Christian since she was like pretty young. She didn't grow up in like a very Christian family necessarily, but yeah, it was like, I think for her, it was kind of her rebellion from her, from her like upper middle class, like Boston area family, German Irish family, to become like weird, like born again Christian, evangelical Christian. So she's been riding hard for that set for a really long time. It's definitely true. So she was like a Bush Republican. She voted for him twice. I don't know about OG Bush, but definitely his son. And she was not into Clinton. My mother was socially more open when I was younger. Like we lived on one of the few black streets in my town. She had like a lot of black friends. Sort of because of me, sort of not, because, my mom's white. My mom's the white one. But at a certain point, like she, I noticed in the ramp up to Trump being, his sort of like ethos and the ideas around him became more and more generalized. She really caught the Trump bug. I mean, she was already like, talking about how all our jobs are going overseas and Mexicans were taking over and, there's a gay agenda, And she, she had gay friends when she was younger. I don't know if they brought her to a back room and hipped her to some kind of agenda. I doubt it. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, so she's now she's describing herself still as a Christian, but she's like a conspiracy theorist, quote unquote.
Oh.
So yeah, she goes hard for it.
So but when you were a kid, did you grow up outside of Boston? I know you lived in New Orleans for a while, but
Yeah. Well, I didn't grow up in New Orleans. I was in New Orleans in my 20s. I grew up in a rural town like 2 hours west of Boston. So like not even in the Boston area, like deep in the woods. Um, yeah, lots of black bear and moose and stuff.
Well, I mean, how did she meet your dad?
That's a really good question. My dad was a taxi driver, and the story that's out there is that my mom was flying to somewhere or flying from somewhere. My dad was her taxi driver, and my dad, he spit some game, and they traded addresses, and yeah, and one thing led to another, and they were together for I think 3 years or something, and he moved out to Western Massachusetts. He's he's black and he's from Lynchburg, Virginia, so I think both being in a very rural place where there's really not that many black people was it's a big commitment on my dad's part to this relationship with this lady who is my mom's a lot. She's a lot.
So they were together for about 3 years. Did you go back and forth between their houses, or were you just mainly living with your mom?
Oh no, yeah, no. My dad, he moved to Los Angeles like maybe 2 years after I was born, and yeah, I grew up with my mom. My dad happened to be in all sorts. He was in L.A. during the L.A. riots. Like he was in Oakland during. I guess like the Panthers were sort of like over by the time it was there, but there was the remnants. He was kind of there for a lot of like Black history in particular. He's boring though. He just drives a taxi. You know what I mean? He wasn't in the mix.
Yeah.
He was telling me about being in the L.A. riots, and he was like, he gave me more information about what his double shift was like than the riots themselves. I was like, all right, Ronnie, let me. This is not what I'm asking you about.
I gotta tell you how much Gatorade I drank. It's crazy.
Right? Yeah. Tell him about the temperature. I'm sure it was hot. There was fire everywhere.
So, how big is this town that you grew up in?
That's a really good question. I would say that it's no bigger than 50,000 people, no smaller than 20. So, as far as towns go, particularly in that area, I think it's the largest town in the area. There's a bunch of little villages. My mom lives in a small, I think, formerly very Polish village connected to the town that I grew up in. But it's mad rural. There's mad hills. It was like a lot of work just to keep my Timbs clean living in that town, if I'm honest.
Yeah. No, I never had nice sneakers because I lived in suburbs, but you go out and you play with your friends, you're in these fields. So they would get disgusting immediately. So it was always just cheap Nikes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's smart. I mean, yeah, you're definitely smarter than me. I would definitely go all out on some Jordans and then end up getting pond water on them.
But I wanted that. I don't know why. I'm this small kid that's not great at basketball. I don't know why I wanted the Jordans, but there was this oh, maybe that's the thing that will make me cool. I don't know. I don't know what the thought was in my head.
Oh, of course. I mean, that was yeah, I mean, basketball shoes, that was the era. You know what I mean? That was the era where it was big outside of the cities to be rocking the basketball shoes. We couldn't help it. I'm not sure that the age you are, I don't want you to snitch on yourself, but it's I'm surprised when people no, I was just wearing, I don't know, scraps of leather. It's everyone I knew was trying to wear nice shoes, or the skater kids had they had Airwalks or Vans or something like that.
Yeah. Wait. Okay. So it's you and your mom. Do you grew up evangelical too? Does she make you go to church?
Yeah. When I was pretty young, I would go to church. I would go to Sunday school. I was even a little well, I was in the choir. I was a little teaching assistant in Sunday school for a little bit, for a hot second. I moonlighted. And then at 13, I was out. I mean, I think like it's interesting because my mother, because she was upper middle class, she really felt our poverty really hard. And so like because of that, that was the first clue that we were really poor, because we were among other people for the most part. Like I grew up with other poor kids. My mother, who is like, she paints, she sculpts, like she's very artistic. She wanted to hang out with sort of like the bourgeois trustafarians in our town. You know what I mean? Who is like, so like, I think my mother was very aware of our poverty and felt like it was a failure. You know what I mean? So I think by the time I was 13, this idea that like there was an omnipotent presence who was in control of everything, and in all his wisdom, he decided we would be broke, seemed fucked up to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it felt like given that, it felt like the more optimistic sort of position to take was that there was no God. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're talking to someone who had learned about the Holocaust like at age 7, and you're telling me that like I'm like I can't remember a time in my life that I felt faith or that I really believed in God. I said I believed in God when I was that age. I don't think I actually did. I don't think I actually had either the conscious thought that I believed in God or the feeling of faith in my body. And I'm just like, you can't tell a kid that like 6 million Jews, or basically like the history of Judaism is just people committing genocide on us, and then also believe that there is an omnipotent God that is like, look, we're the chosen people. I'm like, that stuff doesn't jibe in my brain. Mm-hmm. So I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable position. Like, I don't think that I got like a more transgressive and convincing sense of a kind of spirituality until like my 30s, where like I learned a bit more about like how Pan-African religions played into like the revolts in Haiti, like prior to the Haitian Revolution, and all of that. It's felt much more grounded, like. These are not spiritual beings that make you any particular promises. You know what I mean? So already I'm like, great. You know what I mean? It's like, you're not going to lie to me about what's possible. Like a lot of like African religions are like, they're not like, oh, heaven's going to be tight. You got to be this, this, and this. They have a very similar sort of perniciousness to like, Greek gods or whatever. So I mess with that. And also anything that inspires you to poison and cut up slave owners, I feel like I'm a mess with that. and Christians, by and large, were not really into that in the Caribbean or in the Americas.
I mean, okay, so is that like the first kind of like break from your mom? You're like, you start to like realize like, I don't believe in this. Is that the beginning of the split?
I don't know what came first. I mean, honestly, like the race issue was hard pretty early on. Mm-hmm. We're living in a rural place. With some exceptions, my mother's friends were white. And then, they're two parents that want the kids to play together, right? And I would always hear that I was like a bad influence, that I was like bad for the kids. It's Massachusetts, so like the parents would be like, oh, this kid's got bad vibes. Which all this is, and like many, many years later, I was like, oh, the problem is not my vibes, it's that I was black. And it became increasingly just sort of like an unavoidable division. And my mother had, to her credit, she did try and hit me to some books or whatever, but she did not have the tools to sort of like have a conversation with me about race really. So my relationship with my race was it was a very isolating experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was something that I had to go at alone, probably starting from like the age of 8. So that probably, like, if we had a divide, if we stopped feeling like a team, it was probably 8 years old where that like sort of really started. And then the Christianity stuff, yeah, you know what I mean. That was an issue for my mother, and also I just like enjoyed. I was terrible at school. I didn't like going, so I didn't go very much, and I liked getting drunk and high at a bowling alley. And I think my mother was not feeling great about that either.
Yeah, that sounds like suburban, small town hijinks.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. We were definitely like breakfast clubbing it at in the Cove parking lot.
Ours was Bowlerama. That was the bowling, the local bowling.
Oh, that's a
alley.
better name.
Yeah, it was nice. I liked it. But okay. So I mean, what leads to you being sent to reform school? Then is it just that you just stop going to school and just keep getting drunk at the Cove?
Yeah, I mean that was part of it. I mean the specific thing that happened was that I to my credit, I was very fastidious about getting money, as many kids who grow up poor are. You know what I mean? I started working really young at a fair, but like many poor kids discover, doing crime is a much more efficient way to get money than having, like a job for minimum wage, and you don't usually have to wear a stupid uniform.
Yeah.
So I got in trouble being part of, I guess, for lack of sort of a better word for it, a redneck crime ring.
What?
Yeah, they were out. Because I live in, I live in Norman Rockwell territory. You know what I mean? Like, so people from New York and Boston, they come out to my area. It's very pretty. They're like, oh, let's get a second home. Let's fill it with, ski gear and like heirloom furniture. This will be our nice breakaway from like the torridness of the city. And, because they feel so comfortable, they leave their doors unlocked. And with no alarms on these second homes.
All right.
And they only come once in a while. You know what I mean? So, of course, these all these people who are, there's not a lot of jobs out there other than trimming trees. You know what I mean? Of course, they're going to kick down your door and take all your stuff. I had a closet filled with ski equipment and family heirlooms and things like that, that I was selling here and there. For money as part of this sort of greater, I guess, crime association. Redneck mafia of sorts.
Wait, like the Massachusetts version of the Dixie Mafia, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I guess essentially. Yeah.
Wait, sorry. Okay, hold on. How do you get involved with these people?
Oh, initially?
Yeah.
Well, it's a small town, like, I mean, the story is that like I was I had a friend who was like one of these sort of like weird white kids with like an ape drape and like an attempt at a mustache, who wore like work boots and stuff. Like we're both wearing Timbs, but with a very different, sort of like style trajectory. Mm-hmm. And on our like one of our daily quests to get high, we end up in a car full of these weird rednecks, and they drive us up to the mountains where there's like, like some of these families, they own like a farmhouse. There's no farm anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's just out in the woods. It's a farmhouse. Despite the New Yorkers, like you could still sort of buy something out there for not that much. So we drive up to this farmhouse, and with a lawn sort of littered with like bombed out cars, right? With tarps on them. And we're there because we want to smoke whatever terrible excuse for marijuana existed in this time in like 1990. What is this? Probably 1998, 1999, right? Like no one's heard of Humboldt County yet. You know what I mean? Like no one knows. So we're there for that. And I think these these good old boys who are probably not that much older than us, right? They see two sort of enterprising 16-year-olds, like you really have to work hard where I grew up at the time to get weed. You know what I mean? So, so they're like, all right, these boys really are trying to make something happen. So one of them sort of pulls the tarp back on one of these cars and it's filled with stolen stuff. And every single car is. You would think they would just put it in the garage or something, but anyway, it's out on the lawn, and they're like, if you flip this stuff, we'll take a cut. You'll take a cut. I'm like, this is great. I got a job at Subway. It's terrible. This is much better. Mm-hmm. So you sell a stereo in the Cove parking lot. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to drive many hours for free marijuana. You can just buy it from the creepy dude right here. You know what I mean?
So you would like sell it out of your car? That because I was curious. I like, what do you do? Sell it on eBay? I mean, this is the late '90s. I guess it doesn't.
Oh right, yeah, this is pre-eBay. Well, I didn't even have a car, right? So I'd have to, like I'd be in my high school, or I'd just be out in the world, and I had this stuff at my house, and I'd be like, "Yo, you want?" Because some of the things were just like blunt wraps or whatever. So I'd be like, "Oh, do you want to smoke a terrible Western Massachusetts blunt? Here you go." And here's the price for it, because it's a small town. You have to get like an older person to buy you everything, like if you're a terrible shoplifter, which in the country, there's not but one liquor store, you know what I mean? So you steal liquor from the same small liquor store who the cashier is the cousin of whoever, you can get away with that once, what I mean? You can't keep doing it. And, like, I was old enough that in middle school we would steal cigarettes from the front counters of the drugstore. But after they put it behind the counter, you got to find an adult. So, things like blunt wraps or alcohol or something, these were prized commodities to other teenagers.
My friend, I worked at supermarkets in high school, and my friend had a whole shoplifting empire. He would figure out when he could get behind and steal cartons of cigarettes, and then he would I guess he would sell them. I really don't. This is why I'm curious about this. I'm like, I guess I never asked him how he actually did it. And then because like you're in the back, no one's paying attention to like this is like the late '90s, so it's like pre-surveillance state. I assume they have better control over their employees now of like how they work, but like you could just take stuff from that when you're stocking before you bring it. You could put it in your backpack when no one's looking. I guess so, because I was so straight-laced. I was so scared of all the I know exactly all these things you're talking about from my friends who did this stuff, but I was always so scared to do anything. Like the worst thing I did was I stole a skee ball from Bolorama from their skee ball machine. And that was the height of my criminality.
I'm sure your heart was racing.
Like waiting to get caught, and then what would happen to me? What my parents, because it was more like, would my parents yell at me than anything else?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's fortunate that no one told you that, like, after the first 5 times of the police taking you home, I don't know, like the yelling, you create like a skin. You know what I mean? It's like, is this as bad as it's gonna get? Okay, the mathematics still work in my favor.
So eventually your mom then gets doesn't know what to do, so she sends you to reform school.
Well, I get a felony charge for possession of stolen property, and I think it was technically the first time I was convicted for something. It wasn't my first charge, but it was the first time I was convicted for something. So there was an option for me to not go to prison if my mother could provide, some kind of alternative. So she had me sent to this reform school for initially a year and a half, which is I guess what my sentence would have been, because it was felony level possession of property. That's how I ended up there.
Were you already writing and drawing before this, or did that come in later in your life?
I mean, I always drew. Like I said, my mother was, she was a painter. She was an illustrator. She went to I think a trade school for fashion. So my mother was very encouraging of my drawing. So I was drawing this whole time. Like I was reading, Spawn and other sort of terrible, edgy comics at the time, you know what I mean? And drawing my own dudes covered in spikes, And I got in school suspended quite a bit. So, like I would draw a lot, for lack of a better thing to do. Certainly I was not going to do homework. So, I draw, I don't know, something sort of drug related to impress my friends, and the proctor or whatever would tear it up, and then I'd start over again. Yeah, if I ever win an Eisner Award, I'm gonna wave it over the proctor's head. I'll be like, think of all the content you've torn up.
You have a nomination? Don't you have an Ignatz Award?
Yeah, I won an Ignatz. Yeah.
Yeah, throw that in his face.
Yeah. It's very useful. You can only use it one time though, so I'm really trying to find a a good situation to throw a brick in.
I mean, when does this become your actual path? You're like, oh, this is really what I want to do, or this is, I'm a creative person. This is who I am. That's what I want to focus on.
When I was in reform school, again, I had we weren't allowed to listen to music. There was no video games. You could read some books. There were certain instances, though, when they would take all your books away. So really drawing is what I had most of the time as my escape, and I was an avid drawer. The whole time I was in school, like I said, I never did homework. And my textbooks, my notebooks, they were always filled with drawings, little comics, things that were sort of approximations of comics, I did it really compulsively. And I think there was an art teacher in my reform school who recognized that I liked to do it. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say that I was especially talented. It was just obvious that I liked to do it. So he did support me drawing quite a bit. And, I ended up being at that school for 4.5 years, and we were required, it wasn't a normal school. You didn't go through freshman, junior, sophomore, and graduate. You were there until they let you go, right? So they required that you apply to schools, and I was not even locked up and not allowed to run around and do crimes in a bowling alley. I was not a good student. You know what I mean? I sort of eked by quite a bit. So they were like, what do you want to do? I was like, all right, well, if I have to apply for something, I'll apply for an art school, right? Because I like to draw. I had no idea I did not conceive of myself as an artist, right? I was still thinking of myself as just whatever, I'm just a dude from the Berkshires. You know what I mean? I'll either go to art school, or I'll do what most of the dudes that I knew that, grew up, they were landscapers. They were manual laborers. If you could get a situation where you're a manual laborer and you owned your own business to which meant just you owned a truck, right?
Right.
And people called you, that was a sight better than how most people I knew grew up. Most of the people I grew up with, they ended up homeless or on heroin, or homeless and on heroin. You know what I mean? So I applied for art schools just, as just on a lark, right? Not thinking I was going to get in. And I got into a couple schools. I got into SVA. I think I got into Mass Art, and I had got into the Savannah College of Art and Design, which, I don't know what it's like trying to get in now. It's not hard to get in there. It's not. It doesn't bring the same kind of prestige that SVA did. But yeah. So I got in. I got in some schools, and I was like, all right. I mean, I guess I'll go. You know what I mean? If I got in, I can always be a landscaper. So and it wasn't until I got into school, because I wasn't really allowed to leave this campus almost ever. You know what I mean? I left sometimes, But I wasn't really interacting with other people that much. So like going in, being someone that read comic books, that like superheroes, like these are things that you hid from people. But when I got into college, it was the first time I would be interacting with someone, like particularly an attractive person, and they'd be like, "Oh, you like comic books? That's cool." You know what I mean? Like, "Oh, you draw? You're an artist." It was the first time I had ever heard these things. So it was really in college that was the first time I had a conception of myself as like someone that was an artist, right?
So wait, okay. We're getting towards the end. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but
Oh yeah, no problem.
The reform school rebellion. It seemed like reform school was actually a positive thing in your life.
No, it wasn't a positive thing. It was some positive things happened despite the environment, which I think is sort of roundly true when it comes to being institutionalized. Like the human spirit is strong, and you find ways to sort of like continue to grow as a person. But I don't think being locked up was the solution. Like I was a poor kid with no father, and no one telling me that I was like, like a good at anything, that I could be good at anything. Like this happens to a lot of different kinds of kids, but definitely like being a young black child in America means that no one has faith in you. You already are going to be what you're going to be. Like you're already dangerous, right? So like, all I really needed was probably, an arts program. You know what I mean?
I see. I have a sitcom version of what this is of what reform school is in my head.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a very repressive place. Like it's not prison, and I'm mostly happy I didn't go to prison. But like something that keeps you from being able to go where you want and sort of like find yourself, that like puts you in a constant state of fear and anxiety. It's not a good thing. I mean, this is why whole communities are traumatized. Like, my brother was in prison for a long time. My father was in prison for a long time. Like, we're all like, these are traumatizing experiences that we all had.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of trauma and PTSD that doesn't really get sort of acknowledged very much, like, like within our community and without it.
Right.
So, it's like, what I think is that I survived reform.
I see.
But it is something that, art, drawing comics, it helped me sort of feel some sort of freedom within that space, and I'm happy I can still do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think anyone should be locked up ever.
Right. I think I was trying to find some kind of silver lining.
Oh, silver lining. Yeah. Well, I went to Florida once. That was cool.
But wait, how do they put down the rebellion? That's the thing that's still stuck in my head. Like, did they just like, because you said you built your own little like, Les Mis type moment.
Right. Yeah. Well, the hierarchical sort of structure is very, very important to the school as it is outside of the school. And sort of like a lot of popular revolts, power will figure out a way to sort of validate certain people's, or like sort of stroke certain people's egos into thinking that they should be in charge, and sell out, more marginal people, like more peripherized people. So that's what happened in our case. And, as like sort of like a crazy twist, like I was one of the people that they tricked into being in charge, like I totally, that situation was like sort of the dividing line between Ben as like, a knucklehead who wants to be free, to Ben being all involved in the institution. And sort of that's like, whatever, a whole nother story. But I came out being like, oh, I totally bought into power. I totally bought into hierarchy. And it's like, even though there's a break between me being an anarchist for the most part between 17 or whatever, when we had the uprising, to 19 when I got out. At about 19 is when I started being an anarchist again, recognizing how much I sold my soul and my heart just playing along. And I think it's the difference, maybe if I guess one potential silver lining, depending on who you're talking to, I would probably be much more liberal had I never been locked up. Like many black people, honestly, I probably, I think a lot of us wouldn't have a strong sort of quote unquote revolutionary, sort of insurrectionary or abolitionist position had we never been locked up.
Huh.
But the experience of confinement, you're like, no, by any means necessary, no one should go through this. And no one is going to tell me that there's a lighter, fluffier version of this, because it's not possible.
Ben, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, no problem.
I love your comics. I love talking to you. So thanks again. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.